Hi, my name is Ahmed Sidki, and I want to talk to you today about culture-led agile transformations. All right, so when we start talking about culture-led transformations, I'm starting from a point where I hope the listener agrees that organizational agility, business agility, agile transformation is not about a process change, but it really requires a comprehensive culture transformation because agile is not a process, it's not a methodology, it's a mindset. It's this culture of learning and experimentation. And so, in return, the transformation to agile is really a transformation of culture, not just of process. What is culture? And so I want to show you really quickly here how I like to visualize culture. And the way I visualize culture is think of this rubber band almost, right? And this rubber band is culture. And this rubber band is shaped by the elements inside of it. And so when you look at the culture model here, or the culture triangle, as I like to call it, right? That culture, that rubber band, that exterior sort of bungee cord is shaped by leadership, strategy, structure, process, and people. The leadership, their style, their values, their habits, they make a huge impact on culture. But also strategy, how we set goals, how we set measures of success, how we reward. Are goals set for different silos of the organization, or are they set across the organization for everyone? Do we reward individuals? Do we reward teams? All of those things make a huge impact on the culture of the organization. Also, structure, how we set up roles and responsibilities. You should be in your lane and that's it. Or we have this ownership mentality of like, yes, you have a role, but really we need you to do whatever is good for the customer. How do we make decisions? Are they very bureaucratic and so forth? How are we structured? So structure makes a huge impact on the culture of the organization. Process also, how, the all our business processes, do they enable? Do they stifle? Are they bureaucratic? Are they easygoing? Are they simple? Policies, the value chain that we create, the value streams, all of these things make a huge impact on what the culture of the organization is. Now, another key aspect of culture is people, of course, right? And when we say people, and we draw them here at the base, not because of, a hierarchy or anything like that, just because there's a wide range in the people sort of spectrum, but also there's a lot of people compared to leaders or strategy or structure. And with people, it's the sum total of people's values, beliefs, attitude, norms, habits. All those things make a key contribution to what the culture of an organization is. Now, when we talk about visualizing cultural change, I want you to imagine now that you have this rubber band here as well, right? And you're forcing change in one element, one dimension of the culture, right? Here, like in this visual, it's process. So you have your rubber band and you're pushing one dimension of it. So you're not really changing the culture, you're actually straining the culture. You're putting tension on the culture. You're creating misalignment in the culture because, for example, you have a process that is trying to make people collaborate and, create this team spirit. But you have a reward strategy and measures of success that are still very individual. So then you actually have here a misalignment within your culture, right? So you have a strain to your culture, or people's beliefs are that the only way to actually advance is through competing, not collaborating, right? Or you have leaders that don't believe in the time investment of collaboration. So here you have a misalignment. You're pushing one dimension of culture, but you're actually not aligning the rest of the dimensions to it. So you're actually putting a strain on that culture. And as soon as that force of change removes or changes, the rubber band, that effect pushes things right back to sort of where it was before, right? And that's where you see people sort of waiting out the change. They know this change is not going to last. Why? Because it's just in such misalignment with our culture. So what do we do? Well, before we talk about what we do, I want to just help you visualize some different models for agile transformations, and then really highlight what this cultural change looks like. So let's take a look here at common transformation approaches. So we're really trying to visualize here change from sort of the left-hand side, an industrial age fixed mindset and culture, to a knowledge age agile mindset and culture. And if you are not sure what I mean by agile mindset, look up one of my videos talking about what the agile mindset is. We go into depth what really this mindset shift is about. But anyway, so this is what we're trying to shift here. So common approaches I've seen, one is what I like to call the process-led transformation. So with the process-led transformation, what happens is we push the process piece, right? So we push process, we change process, and a lot of people do this because when you look at Agile, sometimes it looks like it's just a matter of process change. So people change process. Okay, we're going to do 2-week iterations. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And like I said, the red here symbolizes you have a misaligned culture, right? But again, people push forward, and the aspiration, the hope, is that through time, the process change will actually just start to sort of bring structure change and strategy change and people and leadership change. And the aspiration is this will, move to the new sort of agile organization that we're all aspiring for. I have rarely seen this work because somewhere in the middle we get stuck, and this just becomes the new org, right? And you have this misalignment, and usually, unfortunately, leaders are the least that move through this, and so things go back and center where they are over time. So this is process-led transformation. It's the easiest to start with. You sometimes see some really quick returns, but it's the least sustainable from my point of view when we talk about agility in general. It could be a new process, but you don't get all the benefits of business agility, the change of mindset and culture. All right, so moving along here, second is what I like to call team-led transformation, where you have a charismatic leader in a team, and guess what? They say, you know what? We're gonna be agile, right? So they take their team, their little ecosystem, and they make it agile, and it's great, and it works, right? But what you have to understand is they are misaligned with the culture of the rest of the organization at that part. The aspiration here is that this team will inspire others, right? And that happens. And you start to see other teams start to move towards this new way of working, this agile way of working. And the aspiration, again, is that they all come along and we become an agile organization. I've seen this work, but most times I see teams get stuck in this state right here, where now everyone's calling themselves agile because that's what the latest fad is, or that's how people are viewed as, you're doing good if you're doing agile. But there's actually no consistency, no understanding, no common principles or values of how we work, or the mindset shift or any of that. Everyone's just calling themselves agile, and it's a big mess. But by the way, I have seen it where those teams are really influential. They bring the rest of the teams, and especially if at some point here, right, upper management starts to see this, they see what good this is, and they begin a more wider transformation, not just by popping more teams, but by doing something more across the organization. Talking about organizations, you can sort of extrapolate this to organizational-led transformations, where in bigger conglomerates, you have one part of the org, a separate org, the IT org, or the product delivery org, or some part of the org that goes out and does agile all together, right? And they do it right, they do it great. But again, if that org has little influence inside the organization, no, the organizational culture is stronger than it. But if the org has a lot of influence, and I'm not here trying to show the size of the org, but more the influence of the org. If the org has a lot of influence, other parts of the org look to that organization inside the company as like, ooh, they're the trendsetters. We want to be like them. Then actually, I've seen this work and work pretty well too. So there's a beautiful quote here from the book Scaling Up Excellence. When big organizations scale well and change also, they focus on moving 1,000 people forward a foot at a time rather than moving one person forward by 1,000 feet. And for me, really, this is sort of the one of the main principles around culture-led transformation versus let's take an org or a team, move it 1,000 feet forward, but the rest are just looking at it. I was like, what are they doing? How do we get there? And so what I want to show you here is culture-led transformation. And culture-led transformation really is moving the entire triangle together, right? So you take the entire culture of the organization, and that's what you're focusing on changing. So you're changing a little bit of leadership, a little bit of strategy, structure, process, and people. You're moving it a little bit at a time, changing it over time, right? And true culture transformation doesn't only take time, but it needs time because you're changing values, habits, you're changing a lot of different dimensions of the organization, right? And so when you understand that you really truly changing the culture of an organization takes time, when you look at the process-led transformations, somewhere in the middle, we like the pain of a culture change is just so much that we stop, right? Because again, it's taking so much time. But going back here, if you stop at any point, yeah, you may have not gotten to your aspirational destination, quote unquote. I don't believe there is a destination. I think it's a continuous journey, right? But you have something. You moved something forward, something that is hopefully at that point sustainable because they're all aligned. So you've changed a little bit of structure, a little bit of process, a little bit of strategy. Leadership has changed. People's beliefs have changed, and so forth. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about a reality here, which is this notion of quick wins, right? Momentum fuels motivation. So get in the habit of accomplishing these small victories. And so in an agile transformation, the way this looks like, and this is again from experience here, is that you really have these different teams or parts of the org that start to stand out. Now, the difference between this and the team-led transformation that we talked about, the team-led transformation is these teams are doing something, everyone else is doing nothing, right? Versus in the culture-led transformation, these teams are lighthouse teams. These teams show the way of what's possible, but also experiment with quote unquote agile, systems and delivery and process and, mindset and all the different ways of working inside of our org versus just, importing something from the outside. So, and over time, another team may become a lighthouse team and so forth. But there's two things happening simultaneously here. And it's really important because it makes a big, big difference. One is the whole org itself is on a journey. And two is you have these teams that are leading the way and showing people what good looks like. So this is really a practical aspect of culture-led transformation. And so also for many people maybe watching, you already have these teams. You have these teams that have sort of taken steps forward and have really shown progress and promise with Agile. Great. Learn from those and then craft a journey for the entire organization. But again, when I say the entire organization, it's not just adding more teams. It's really looking at all the dimensions of culture and moving those all forward. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So one other thing to sort of visualize this aspect of change in culture-led transformations is the Virginia-Satir change curve. Some people call it the J curve, the change curve, whatever you want to call it, really. But once you introduce change, there's this short-term excitement that happens, but then you have all this resistance and chaos until this new way of working becomes part of how we work, and we reach a new comfort zone, right? And this takes time. And as agilists and change agents, we want to reduce that time of resistance and chaos as much as possible, because that's when a lot of times the org feels bad, wants to revert back to the way it was, or just can't handle that amount of change. And so looking at sort of agile transformation in iterations, very similar to how we think about sort of delivering agile software or delivering, agile products, where each iteration is a full standalone product, right? Similarly, we think about transformation here, that each iteration of change, the organization is in a full state of equilibrium around its culture. Leadership, strategy, structure, process, and people are aligned around what is important and how we work, right? So that not only reduces that chaos and resistance, but also we start to see iterations of change and iterations of gain that are sustainable over time. All right, so how do we change culture? So let's dive a bit deeper in here. And what I'd like to do now is give you a shoe level recipe. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say shuhari is a progression of learning. So you start by copying, then you start to break away, and then you start to create your own. I have a whole video about shuhari. But anyway, what I mean by a shoe level recipe is this is an entry level recipe. Meaning I'm taking something very complex and boiling it down to some basic steps to put you on the right path to get started. But really, there's a lot of depth and complexity in everything I'm going to talk about here. But at some point, you have to simplify it so other people can learn it. That's what shoe level means. So this is a shoe level recipe for how to approach a transformation, an agile transformation. And so the shoe level recipe is 3 steps: vision, outcomes, and culture. And I'll explain each of them in a lot more detail right now. So step 1 is inspire the hearts and minds. Create an inspiring vision for your transformation. So let's align on some terms, because I think that will be very helpful throughout the rest of this conversation. So first, vision. What is vision? When we say the word vision, it's a clearly articulated, results-oriented picture of a future you intend to create. It's basically a dream with a direction. In our context, we're not talking about a company vision, right, or a product vision, but we're talking about a transformation vision. You are saying, we want a new way of working at your company, right? What is that vision of the new way of working? Because if people can't see it, if all they hear about is, we're going to be agile, we want to do this, we want to do that, but they can't see a picture, they're not inspired by the picture, it's not a dream with a direction, you won't win the hearts and minds, let alone actually point people in the right direction. That point people in the right direction brings us to the second term, which is impact, right? Impact are the big significant changes that need to happen for us to realize our vision. And they come from outcomes at scale, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I just want you to take that first part of the definition, right? Significant change that needs to happen for us to realize our vision. So basically ask yourself, what's standing between us and achieving that vision that we just articulated? I want to show you some examples because I think that will be super helpful. So this is Ford's vision from 1905. The vision statement itself is democratize the automobile. The vision statement doesn't carry a lot of weight. It doesn't inspire. It doesn't point to a North Star. A lot of people don't even understand what it means, but the vivid descriptions add all that inspiration, add that all vividness to it. So we will build a motor car for the great multitudes. It will be so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one and enjoy with his family the blessing of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces. When we are through, Everyone will be able to afford one. The horse will have disappeared from our highways and the automobile will be taken for granted. So that's the vividness of it. You can see, like, there's a big difference between democratize the automobile and this vivid description of what we're trying to do. But also really, really important is that last part, the desired areas of impact. Because the target audience of these vision statements is not just publicity, but it's really the employees themselves. What a good vision statement and vivid description does is it aligns people on what are the big things that we need to change to achieve this vision. And for Ford in 1905, it was cost and mass production. If they could figure that out, if they could crack that nut, then they could actually achieve that vision. What's also important to understand is the context behind the vision, right? So when we look at the context here, Henry Ford was a man that was known, if you read his autobiography, to love open spaces. He thought, this country, the US, had great space that we needed people to explore and see. And so this language that you see here, right? The purpose, the higher purpose, wasn't just to create a car, but the car enabled people, right, to enjoy the open spaces that this country had to offer, and people really couldn't enjoy it with just the horses, right? And so the context is really, really important, and to see what the purpose here is, right? Another one, Sony, 1950. The vision statement: become the company that most changes the worldwide image of Japanese products as being of poor quality. So you can sort of see, we're coming out of World War. There's a certain, picture about Japanese products. They're being of poor quality. There's a certain image of Japan at that point. And Sony's vision, right? An inspiring vision. Let's read the vivid descriptions here. We will create products that become pervasive around the world. We will be the first Japanese company to go into the American market and distribute directly. We will succeed with innovations like the transistor radio that American companies have failed at. 50 years from now, our brand name will be as well known as any on earth and will signify innovation and quality that rivals the most innovative companies anywhere. Made in Japan will mean something fine, not shoddy. And again, the desired areas of impact, the things that I'm focusing the organization on: innovation, quality, brand recognition, right? And so these vision statements become super, super important for a transformation. I have seen many, many companies, many, many leaders talk about transformations without providing a strong vision. You need to invest time in articulating. And yes, every word in a vision counts because you're addressing people's pictures in their heads, their feelings, their minds, you're inspiring them. Let me show you an example of a vision statement for a transformation, not for a company. And let's see how that provides that North Star for the transformation. So this is company ABC. The transformation vision is a unified global team delivering a delightful experience every day. Again, the vision statement itself may not say a lot, but let's take a look at the vivid descriptions. Silos are no longer tolerated. We are one team across the globe. Collaboration is in our DNA. We will invest time to collaborate together. Teams will feel energized because they get to work with other teams instead of have to work with them. And while collaboration may be hard and many times messy, it will also be exciting and invigorating. Our energy to work together comes from knowing we can and will deliver a bold new world for our customers. We will do the impossible for them and challenge anyone who says we can't do it. Trying to just get more things out of the door will be a thing of the past, and we will ruthlessly prioritize the work that will bring the most value and delight to our customers. Our workplace feels different than anywhere else. We feel safe to learn through failure. We are brave enough to experiment. We are agile enough to change daily. We are humble enough to listen to feedback. Everything just works. There's no noise anywhere, just energy everywhere. So looking at that, it provides a picture of what we want to achieve, but also the desired areas of impact. It's clear. We got to figure out this collaboration across silos. We got to figure out this customer centricity and this culture of learning. So we boil down this agile transformation so people can see the picture and they know the three things we need to overcome, right, are the silos and collaboration and figuring that out. The customer centricity, are we really building the most valuable things to our customer? And this culture of learning and experimentation. That's our focus. Great. And we're done when we achieve those things, not when we just, roll out a process or Jira or this or that. Again, those are good and helpful, but the transformation is much bigger than a process or a tool. This brings us to step number 2, identify outcomes. So we're going to go back to our definitions and introduce 2 more definitions that will help us really understand step 2 a bit better here. All right. So we talked about vision and impact. Outcome is the behavioral change that occurs in a member or members of an audience when you give them an output. And the output is the thing produced or delivered to an audience, right? So you build a thing, you give it to someone, or you ship it or something, and then a certain behavioral change happens, right? And so those behavioral changes at scale and over time are what create impact. And then you see, all those impacts come together and you have vision. Let me show you an example here of how this all connects. So I'm taking Tesla's vision, paraphrasing it to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, right? So we want to start by always having that clear vision. What are we trying to achieve? From the vision, we move into impact. So the impact here is a world that stops relying on fossil fuels for transportation. So the idea here is what? If I want to achieve this vision, what are the big levers? What are the big mountains I need to overcome to start to see that vision come to reality? Well, one of the first ones is that the world stops relying on fossil fuels for transportation. Okay, great. So if that's the impact I want to have, I want you to start thinking, what is the behavioral changes that I want to see in an audience? And so the outcome is people purchase an electric car. I mean, that's a obvious behavioral change. Great. People purchase an electric car, but what kind of car? All right. Well, okay, so this is the behavioral change. What output do I build to achieve that outcome? Well, that goes, into another level of detail here, where we, if the target audience is a tech-savvy, high-end luxury car buyer, then I need to build something like the Model X to see that behavior achieved, which is purchase an electric car. But if my target audience is maybe tech-savvy, entry-level luxury buyers from 20 to young 40s, I need to build a different output like the Model 3 in order to see that behavioral change of purchase an electric car. So what we want to find is the behavioral change. And even when we find that behavioral change, there's still levels of detail that go beyond, okay, so to see this behavioral change in leadership, we may need to do something, and see this behavioral change in, our people, our frontline employees, we may need a different output, right? So I just want you to keep that in mind. But the behavioral change here is, I want people to buy an electric car. Now, to achieve an impact, there may be multiple outcomes that we need to realize. So another outcome here, for example, is we want other car manufacturers to produce more electric cars. Now, the key here really is think about the easiest output to produce in order to achieve that outcome. So how do you get other car manufacturers to produce more electric cars? Well, Tesla opened their patents and open sourced them. And that actually really fueled a whole, wave of innovations and adoption in the space of electric cars. Another outcome could be governments, right? So the target audience there is governments putting regulations on emissions and car sales, gas car sales, and so forth. So the point is, there's multiple outcomes that achieve that impact. The impact achieves the vision. And then even when you have those outcomes, there's a wide range of outputs to achieve that specific outcome. Now let's go back to our example about the transformation. So a unified global team delivering a delightful experience every day. Great. That's the vision we want. What's the impact? So again, where do we search for the impacts? We search for them inside the vision statement. Remember when we said those desired areas of impact, right? And so here we behave as one team. That collaboration across silos, right? That's the impact we want to see. And, you can add some subtext there. We want to see leaders operate as a single team, not siloed mindset, focus on holistic customer experience, et cetera, et cetera. From there, we want to start to brainstorm. Okay, if that's the impact we want, what behaviors do we need to see? This is the hard work. This is really, really the hard work. Sitting down as a transformation team and say, okay, here's our vision, here's the areas we need to impact, and then boiling it down to here's the behaviors we need to see change. I hope you're noticing, I'm not talking about systems. I'm not talking about processes. I'm talking about people behaviors. So I want people to reach outside their departments and business units to help each other when working on common goals. I want team members to take initiative, do things outside of their defined role instead of complaining, blaming others, giving excuses, or saying someone should do this, right? I want senior leaders to make only the most critical decisions and push decisions down to the front line. I want senior leaders to empower and encourage decision-making in others. These are the behaviors that I want to see, right? Now, where do I go for inspiration about these behaviors? Here's one sort of resource to go and look at, and that's the Domains of Business Agility by the Business Agility Institute. They talk about a bunch of different dimensions: one team, people management, process agility, ownership, growth mindset. Go and open those domains, read through them. You will be inspired on what the different behaviors that you want to see in an agile organization is. But the bottom line is here. You need to boil it down to behaviors, right? Not practices, not specific processes or frameworks, but in light of the vision of how we want to work. What are the areas of impact? And then how are we going to achieve this impact? It's by behaviors at scale and over time. And that brings us to our third step in culture-led transformation, which is craft a culture transformation roadmap. So what we mean by this is, remember we talked about the vision, the impact, the outcome, but we really didn't talk about the output. What is the output? The output is the culture. It's holistic. It's all of these elements inside of the culture, right? It's leadership, strategy, structure, process, and people. Let me show you a little more here. So if we want to behave as one team, that's the impact we want to have. We need to see these behavioral changes. Senior leaders, so-and-so, team members, so-and-so, people reach out of their departments. Great. So if that's the things, those are the behavioral changes we want. Now, the question here is, what things do we need to change in leadership? What things do we need to change in strategy to achieve these behaviors? So, for example, I may add in my, whatever performance management cycle you have, certain criteria of, are you helping people outside your org? Maybe people outside your org are part of the 360 that you do, right? Leadership, right? Certain mindsets. I need to educate on the power of collaboration. I may need to actually even change our compensation model for senior leaders so that we're all in it together. And it's not just, maybe the weight goes more on the team performance than individual performance, right? The structure. Maybe I need to introduce new roles, right, that create this connective tissue across our organization. I've seen that. I've done that at Riot, where we had to create a whole team that is just really the connective tissue across the organization. That's a structural change. Process change. How do you introduce process, right? And certain workflows that encourage collaboration. Maybe when you have multiple teams dependent on each other, they do a joint chartering session so that we all have a common working agreement. I'm just giving examples here, right? And so within people, what also needs to change, right? So what kind of coaching, mentoring do we need to do for people to really have them get into this collaborative mindset, right? You may need to do facilitated interventions, right? All these things are what we need to start to think about, whether it's in leadership, strategy, structure, process, and people. But what I want you to get from this is they connect, right? So I want to see these behavioral changes. I can't just change process and not change strategy or leadership or people. I can't do that. It won't work. Why? Because going back, you're straining your culture, right? The culture is the sum total of all of these things together, and they work in harmony. They connect each other, right? They supplement, they complement each other. All of those things are really, really important to understand. And so you start to create this roadmap that you have, one impact is the one team. You want people to thrive through collaboration. You want that customer centricity. And you start to put this roadmap and whatever impacts you have. And as you can see here, it's really never ending because this journey to agility is never ending, right? Because the moment you've achieved a certain, capability or impact, then you envision something else that's even more awesome and you keep going there. And so you also set the expectation of the organization that we're going to be continuously improving. We're going to find different impacts, different aspiring behavioral changes, and then we're going to roll those out over time, right? And that's really, really a powerful mindset to have within an organization. Here's just an example of what we did at Riot Games: leadership, strategy, structure, process, and people, and how really we put the impacts on the left here, and we started really brainstorming like, okay, what can we do here towards each of these? And then you start to really create this roadmap across the organization, multi-year, that starts to show you what this transformation looks like. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is those three things in the middle: strategy, structure, and process are the non-human elements of culture. They're the non-human elements. And so usually when we start looking at them, they're the easiest to change: strategy, structure, and process. Why? Because they're the non-human elements. Changing people is hard. And so I see an overemphasis sometimes on, okay, let's start there. Let's change strategy, structure, or process. And usually process is easier than strategy or structure, right? And hope that by changing those, people will change. And I've seen an overemphasis on this middle part of these roadmaps: strategy, structure, and process. What I want to invite you to really think about is putting people first, starting with leadership and people, right? And understanding that this is a deeply human transformational journey, right? And especially leaders. What can we change with leaders? And that change is hard, right? Changing people and their mindsets and mental models and values and beliefs, they're hard, right? But when we change them, they can inform the right strategy, structure, and process, and you'll find less resistance in the org. And so what I want you to look at is, when you invest in transformational learning and education and coaching and mentoring across the people and leadership dimensions, that starts to create a new mindset in people where they say, oh, here's the strategy changes we need to make, or here's the structural changes we need to make. And it becomes less of a resistance and more of an enablement. Where do you go for some of these things? I want to invite you to look at IC Agile stuff. These are all Creative Commons, but these are learning roadmaps across, HR, engineering, marketing, product ownership, delivery, coaching, DevOps, across the whole enterprise, really, to just highlight for people, what do you need to learn, right? And then you have your coaches, your mentors, and so forth to help them actually learn that. This is a deeply transformational journey that is based on learning and changing mindsets. And when you do that, when you really invest in that people component, they will in turn help change the strategy, structure, and process. And what you get from there is a complete org transformation from these leadership and people components, changing the culture. And from there, you start to see the culture holistically move in a different direction. and you're moving the culture, not a component of the culture. And that's what we mean by culture-led transformation. So just to summarize here, again, acknowledging this is a shoe-level recipe, meaning there's a ton of complexity in actually rolling this out. But when things are so complex, I need a starting point. I need something to get started with. And so I invite you to think about these 3 steps: vision, outcomes, and culture. Vision. Invest in creating an inspiring, vivid vision that articulates the North Star, but also articulates those desired areas of impact. From there, invest a ton of time, really boiling it down to what are the behavioral changes we want to see. From there, each of these behavioral changes, start thinking, what changes do we need to do across the dimensions of our culture, leadership, strategy, structure, process, and people to start to see these behavioral changes. I hope this has provided some inspirational thought for you, a different perspective on how to approach your agile transformation. Keep in touch with me. Tell me how it goes. If you have any questions, send me on my website. Thank you so much.